Welcome to another episode of Overanalyzing Television. Today we will be looking at the cult sitcom Party Down. Now, a lot of times when a show appears on so many lists of underrated shows and cult shows, they reach a point where they almost feel overrated. However, I don't feel like that's the case with Party Down. I've never met anyone who watched this show and didn't find it to be absolutely hilarious. I think the main reason it wasn't a hit when it came out was just because it was on Stars. Unlike a lot of sitcoms which take several episodes or even several seasons to finally find their stride, Party Down was funny right out of the get-go. Which is good because it only lasted 2 seasons and a total of 12 episodes. So what was it about Party Down that made it so funny? Well, I think part of it was the fact that it wasn't censored. The characters were allowed to swear. When they were portrayed as smoking a joint, they didn't say we were eating a sandwich like on How I Met Your Mother. They were actually shown smoking the joint. There was even some brief nudity. It's kind of refreshing when you're used to watching network TV comedies to see a show like this. However, the real reason Party Down stands out is because of the characters. I think Ron and Roman are two of the best characters in sitcom history. You know both of these guys. Ron is exactly the type of guy who would be a Party Down team leader. He's every manager at a dollar store, he's your first boss, he's every guy who's not on the bottom rung of the employment ladder, but isn't very high up either. He's named the team leader because he actually takes his job seriously, unlike all the other members of the team. I mean, really, if you were Alan Duck or whatever, would you want any of these guys leading your Party Down team? No, you'd have to pick Ron. But the reason he's not amounted to anything more in life than being a Party Down team leader, despite the fact that he tries so hard, is because he's an utter moron. Much of the show is him working incredibly hard to please the people who his team is catering for. He often tries too hard to impress them, and it ends up backfiring. Of course, he also has to cover for the incompetence of his staff. Being not a very good decision maker, he's very good at turning small problems into big ones. You kind of feel sorry for him, but he's sure fun to watch in action. And things work out for him pretty well in the end, too. Then there's Roman. It's common for sitcoms to have a nerd character, but Roman may be the first sitcom nerd who they ever truly got right. Usually sitcoms portray the nerd as the guy who is good at heart and really wants to fit in, but he was small and had asthma, so he was never good at sports, and therefore never did. I've known a lot of socially awkward guys in my life. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and most of them don't have asthma. In my experience, most nerdy, antisocial guys are guys who clearly didn't fit in at a young age, so they became very bitter and negative towards the world, and since everyone thought they were an asshole, no one wanted to hang out with them, so they became even more bitter towards the world. It's a vicious cycle that a lot of young people get trapped in. I was in engineering school for a while, and half the guys there were just like Roman. On one hand, you kind of wanted to befriend them, because they clearly didn't have any friends, and you didn't feel like they were a terrible guy. But then when you started hanging out with them, they would just insult you constantly, and act like they were way smarter than you, and you get to a point where you'd be like, fine, jerk, go make friends on your own. I can think of a couple scenes in the show that really exemplify this. One is in the episode where Rick Fox is a guest star. When his name is mentioned, Roman goes, ugh, he was overrated when he was on the Lakers. In most sitcoms, they would have had him go, who's Rick Fox? Why are the Lakers? What's basketball? I'm just a nerd, I don't know anything about sports. I don't know where this notion that socially inept guys don't like sports comes from. Most of the guys who follow sports obsessively are socially inept. Of course, if Roman were a basketball fan, he would have a well-analyzed opinion on whether or not he thought Rick Fox was a good player, and then he'd analyze how much credit Rick Fox gets and decide whether Rick Fox is overrated or underrated. I never was much of a basketball fan, so I can't tell you what I think of Rick Fox. But I was a pretty big baseball fan as a teenager, and I had whole spreadsheets of various statistics, so I could tell you whether a player was good, bad, underrated, overrated, or whatever, and I'd have numbers to back it up. Then there's the scene where Kyle and Roman are talking to a girl, and Kyle and the girl both think that Light My Fire was written by Jim Morrison, while Roman knows that it was actually written by Bobby Krieger. Once again, in a typical show, they would have had Roman, the nerd, go, who's Jim Morrison? What are the Doors? I don't know anything about rock music, I only listen to classical. But once again, that's not how it works. It's another common track for socially inept guys to go down, to become obsessed with rock music history. And of course, any rock music nerd knows that Light My Fire was a Bobby Krieger composition. Meanwhile, the free-spirited self-proclaimed musician Kyle probably wouldn't know that. I also like the fact that they made Roman really creepy with women. Mostly just because it's funny to watch a guy be really creepy with women, but also because most socially inept guys are. Most nerds aren't Leonard Hofstadter from The Big Bang Theory. They aren't sweethearts. They're the type of guys who keep sexual harassment boards at colleges very busy. The other characters were good too. Henry and Casey basically played the standard sitcom characters of straight man and his on-again, off-again girlfriend. So I didn't think they were particularly original. I've definitely met guys who were kinda like Kyle, although he did seem a little extreme to me. Maybe I would know people just like him if I lived in Hollywood. Then there's the final character, the middle-aged woman who was played by a series of actresses, and eventually became the stereotypical mother who really wants her daughter to be a star. Once again, I feel like I'd know this character a lot better if I lived in Hollywood, but there definitely are mothers like this everywhere. All of the characters on Party Down were somewhat believable. You could totally imagine meeting them, and you could totally imagine all of them working a low-end catering job. And that to me is what makes Party Down so funny. When you think about it, a lot of the standard sitcom stock characters aren't that believable. I've never met a player along the lines of Barney Stinson or Charlie Harper in my life. Yet, for a long time, there was a player like that on every sitcom. I really wish I had a wacky neighbor like Kramer from Seinfeld, but I never have. In an age where there are millions of sitcoms to choose from, having a sitcom where the characters actually felt like people you know made that sitcom seem a little more funny.